Hello! Today is a special video where I have pulled several of the most iconic stories that have ever been on Reddit. Today I effed up by allowing my husband to come to dinner at my boss's house. Note, my husband told this Today I effed up from his perspective a couple years ago, and it was a popular post. Someone suggested I should tell it from my perspective. Hope our discomfort brings a little joy to you fine Redditors. This actually took place a couple of years ago. I had just gotten a brand new job that I was really excited about. So I was delighted when my boss, who I had been trying to establish a rapport with, invited me and my husband over to her home for dinner. Well, mostly delighted. My husband is, well, he's the sweetest, but he has a history of doing really dumb stuff. Because of this, I was worried about him coming along. By the time the day of dinner arrived, I had become so anxious about it that I actually floated the idea by my boss that I wasn't sure if he would be able to make it. She was clearly taken aback and responded, "Oh no, I really hope he can. I have a dinner for all three ready to go." Upon seeing her dismay, I assured her that I was sure he would find a way to be there. Well, we made it over to our apartment on time. Things actually started out really well. It was actually just the three of us, which surprised me somewhat, but made me a little less concerned about my husband, as crowds tend to bring out his unpredictability. I had just started to finally relax and was a couple bites into a deliciously cooked steak when things took a horrible turn. My boss had just stepped into the kitchen to check on dessert when I noticed something odd out of the corner of my eye. It was one of those things where you know something strange is happening in your peripheral, but you're not sure what. You have to look over and focus your gaze to really comprehend it. I look over at my husband and see him holding his steak in his hand, hovering it just an inch or two above his plate. Before I had a chance to fully comprehend what I was seeing and verbalize something that might have saved all of us from the coming horror, he threw his steak, baseball style, across the room straight into the dining room window. It hit the window, making a loud noise, and slowly slid down. Now, my husband does dumb stuff. I already told you that. But he's not a crazy person. Usually, when he does dumb stuff, I at least understand what he's thinking. There's usually some semblance of rhyme or reason to the dumb stuff. In this case, I was just dumbfounded. I couldn't believe my eyes. I couldn't wrap my head around what was going on. I stared at him with what must have been the most confused look and watched as he stared back at me, an expression of utter horror painted across his face. I couldn't make any sense of what was happening, but I also didn't have time to try. I heard the footsteps of my boss coming to see what the sound was. It suddenly sunk in that it didn't matter why he did what he did. He did it, and we were all about to come face to face with a very awkward situation. I could feel the anger flush through my face. For a brief moment, I contemplated trying to help my husband get out of this, but no. This was his dumb stuff bed, and he could lie in it. Not like there was any possible recovery anyway. My boss walks in and sees the steak lying on the windowsill. There's the longest, most awkward pause where we all just sit there frozen. My boss and I are staring at my husband, forcing the ball into his court as the cringe just hangs in the air like ocean fog. He finally manages to mutter some incoherent garbage about being a klutz and even tries to get me to back him up. I leave his butt out to dry in the deafening silence. He makes a poor attempt at cleaning the window and retrieves his steak. Mercifully, my boss asks me a question about work, and we both dive eagerly into conversation. We all resume the rest of the evening pretending that he isn't there, a sort of unspoken agreement by all that this is the only way to move forward. As soon as we got to the car, my husband turned into a nervous chatterbox trying to explain himself. Turns out the dumb fool didn't like the way his steak was cooked, rare, and get this, he thought the window was open. My husband, ladies and gentlemen, tried to chuck his steak out a three-story window. He thought that was a reasonable solution to being served an undercooked steak. A year or so later, my boss hosted a Christmas party for the company at her newly built home. My best friend, Jenny, was my plus one. Edit. Okay, guys, I probably overplayed the dumb stuff angle. Yeah, he's known for acting without thinking things through, but this one moment does not represent the norm. From my perspective, in this moment, he looked like a Looney Bin character gone mad, which is what makes the story so funny in retrospect. Go read his perspective, and his actions look at least a little bit less crazy. My husband is a fun loving, kind husband and father who makes life very fun. Edit 2. No, my husband is not on the spectrum or crazy, although I get that that may seem like a valid conclusion if all you know is this one event. The usual dumb stuff is more of your everyday impulsiveness, like immediately saying the slightly inappropriate thing that comes to mind. If he would have done that, it wouldn't have shocked me at all. This, of course, shocked me because he normally doesn't do things that make him look insane. Not sure why some seem to be taking the he often does dumb stuff to mean he often does completely insane things, when I feel like I was making the exact opposite point. Oh well, glad that most of you got some small bit of enjoyment out of your day from the story. Also, we all have our faults. I joke about my husband not thinking things through. He jokes about my preoccupation with what others think of me, etc., etc. I couldn't handle it the first time I read that story. The imagery is so much more vivid than most stories. Sitting quietly at a private dinner and then, with all the conviction and purpose of someone jumping out of the way of an oncoming train, bare fisting a steak and hucking it across the room for seemingly no reason. This was actually the update, which made more sense to start with. Next, we have the original, where the husband explains what he was thinking. Today, I effed up by throwing my steak out a window. Last night, my wife's boss from her brand new job invited us over for dinner. On the drive over, my wife reiterated many times to me just how important it was to make a good impression. I scoffed and arrogantly informed my silly wife that I always make good impressions. My wife's boss is a single lady in her 50s, so it was just the three of us. We chit chatted over drinks and salads and seemed to really be hitting it off. She laughed at my well timed, perfectly appropriate jokes, and my wife seemed pleased. Soon she brought out the main course, a nice big juicy steak for each of us. As I began to cut into my steak, I was discouraged to discover how undercooked this steak was. Now, I've had my fair share of rare steak. I prefer medium, but I can handle rare. This was several minutes on a hot grill short of rare. I probably could have resuscitated the cow had I tried. Instead, I sat there fidgeting with my knife and fork, worrying about how I was going to get away with not eating this steak. Claim veganism? No. I'd already feigned great enthusiasm upon seeing the steak. Just then, our hostess excused herself to the kitchen to take care of some dessert preparations. As I looked across the fancy dining room table at the open window of this third-story apartment, a cartoon light bulb appeared over my head. I knew I had to be decisive, realizing that she could return at any moment. I committed. I grabbed the steak with my hand, gently shook off the juice, and executed a perfect throw right through the center of the open window. Here's the big time effed up. The window wasn't open. It was the cleanest fricking window you've ever seen in your life. That is, until my mostly raw slab of steak slammed up against it and slowly slid down, leaving a trail of bloody juice in its wake. My wife, whose steak was a nice medium rare and was unaware of my predicament, turned, jaw dropped, and stared at me like I was an alien from another planet. This look then slowly morphed into more of a there is no place on this planet you can ever hide from me expression of demonic anger. My wife's boss heard the thud of the steak on the window impact and came quickly. She took in the scene, the steak sitting on the windowsill, the blood trail, my empty plate, and then gave me an inquisitive, puzzled look. I just didn't know what to say. It felt like a minute of silence, but was probably 3 or 4 seconds. Finally, the best I could manage was, uh, I'm so sorry. I'm such a klutz. I don't know. I was just cutting it and it slipped. Just ask my wife. I really am a klutz, right, honey? No help coming from that direction. I will clean this up. I can't believe this. I am so sorry, etc., etc. Both women continued to stare at me like I had escaped from the loony bin as I smeared the blood around the window with my cloth napkin, dusted off the steak, and continued to mutter my incoherent explanation. I knew no one was buying the story. I knew what I had to do. I sheepishly returned to my seat and proceeded to eat every bite of that disgusting, cold, chewy, bloody raw steak. I remained pretty quiet the rest of the evening. My wife's only 2 words to me since the incident are, I'm fine. Update. Just got the first post, I'm fine, communication from my wife via text, who is at work. Good news. Boss's name and I just had a good laugh over how much of a dumb idiot you are. I hope you know you will never live this down. Love you, you fool. Oh, goodness. It makes the story a little bit easier to understand, but only a little bit. The comments detail the many, many ways the husband could have handled this better. The Big Save said, "It's times like this when you should just fake a seizure." Klaus GT commented, "This is some sitcom level awkward crap right here. You could have just told her your steak was too rare for your liking." And in response, or say your stomach hurts, or you bit your teeth, your jaw aches, you're nauseous, you have to go to the bathroom for a moment, nearly anything other than huck a steak at a window. Awesome. I know my own username said, "You should have grilled the steak under the pretense that you were killing off any germs it might have picked up on the floor." In response, OP said, "Damn it, that's a good idea." Next up, I was 22 years old when I learned that not every family has a poop knife. My family poops big. Maybe it's genetic, maybe it's our diet, but everyone births giant logs of crap. If anyone has laid a mega poop, you know that sometimes it won't flush. It just lays across the hole in the bottom of the bowl, and the vortex of draining water merely gives it a spin as it mocks you. Growing up, this was a common enough occurrence that our family had a poop knife. It was an old, rusty kitchen knife that hung on a nail in the laundry room, only to be used for that purpose. It was normal to walk through the hallway and have someone call out, "Hey, can you get me the poop knife?" I thought it was standard kit. You have your plunger, your toilet brush, and your poop knife. Fast forward to 22. It's been a day or two between poops, and I'm over at my friend's house. My friend was the local supplier and always had guests over, because you can't buy goods without sitting down for a bit and sampling it for an hour. I excuse myself and lay a gigantic turd. I look down and see that it's a sideways one. So I crack the door and call out for my friend. He arrives and I ask him for his poop knife. "My what?" "Your poop knife," I say. "I need to use it, please." "What the frack is a poop knife?" Obviously, he has one, but maybe he calls it by a more delicate name. A fecal cleaver? A dung divider? A guanoglaive? I explain what it is I want and why I want it. He starts giggling, then laughing. Then lots of people start laughing. It turns out the music stopped and everyone heard my pleas through the door. It also turns out that none of them had poop knives. It was just my messed up family with their messed up bowels. Frack my life. I told this to my wife last night, who was amused and horrified at the same time. It turns out that she did not know what a poop knife was and had been using the old rusty knife hanging in the utility closet as a basic utility knife. Thankfully, she didn't cook with it, but used it to open Amazon boxes. She will be getting her own utility knife now. Edit. Common question. Why was this not in the bathroom instead of the laundry room? Answer. We only had one poop knife, and the laundry room was central to all three bathrooms. I have no idea why we didn't have three poop knives. All I know is that we didn't. We had the one. Possibly because my father was notoriously cheap about the weirdest things. So, yes, we shared our poop knife. Really had to hold it together for that one. Another hilarious classic. This one actually spawned a product industry, I'll have you know, where you can now buy quote unquote poop knives with the origin story on the product referencing who they call the reluctant hero. You learned but samurai of the poo poo platter. As you might imagine, there were some people who came out of the woodwork emboldened by the hero to share their own tales of the moment they realized other people don't have poop knives. I am not touching you had this story to share. My friend's sister laid a huge turd in the toilet. She couldn't get it to flush, so she just casually strolls into kitchen while me and my buddy are watching Friday night movies and grabs a pocket knife from the junk drawer. Goes back towards the bathroom. My buddy is, "Hey, what the F you need a knife for?" So she says the toilet won't flush. Their dad hears this, jumps up, and runs down to bathroom and screams, "Who the crap this turd?" Which brings mom into the bathroom. She freaks out. Now all five of us are in the throne room in admiration of her magnificent turd. The dad asks, "What is the knife for?" And his sister goes, "It's what I used to cut them." Yeah, that's what she said. It was silent until her mom asked, "How long have you been cutting turds with that knife?" I am dying. My friend is in tears. Well, since we are all here, I guess the secret is out, so I get massive turds on my period, mom. So for about 6 years, mom. She goes to leave, and her dad grabs her and says, "Cut the cheese, sweet pea, and that's your knife now." That's it. I can't breathe. I am laughing so hard. She is in tears, her mom is mortified, and her dad was trying to be supportive. My buddy and I are being total jackasses. Her dad pulls us aside and threatened to kick the crap out of us if a word of Sir Turdley of Bummertown gets out of the house. We never said a word about it outside of their house, but we were brutal to her at home. On to the next fun one, which spawned a whole subreddit with an update at the end. The Tale of Kevin the Fool. It's not uncommon as a teacher to have students who are a bit behind the curve in certain aspects, but 99.9999% of the time, they are keen on something. They might not understand how to identify a noun or what theme is, but they somehow know how to make a mean plate of nachos. You learn pretty quick to not judge fish for their tree climbing ability, you know? I thought this was the rule when I was teaching, until I met Kevin. Kevin isn't his real name, but it doesn't matter because he can't spell it anyway. Kevin was a student of mine during my last year of teaching. He came to my classroom with very little to show for his academic past. He had moved a few times and thus was missing a lot of typical test scores that we use to try and ballpark their ability. Don't worry, it was a ballpark. We didn't make major decisions until we actually had a chance to talk and work with the student for a bit. I thought, that's fine. I'll just do some one on one with Kevin and see what's up. One on one with Kevin was like conversing with someone who'd forgotten everything in a freak, if not impossible, amnesia incident. There was no evidence that he had learned anything past the second grade, and now he was in ninth grade. Flabbergasted, I figured we needed to get more serious with this. If he was going to be in my class, I needed to know why and how. I decided to meet with him, his guidance counselor, his parents, and another teacher to see what was really going on. This is where it all became clear. It was by some incredible fluke that his family hadn't been wiped off the face of the earth years ago. Odds are his entire heritage was based on blind luck and some type of sick divine intervention that saves his family every time a threat presents itself. Kevin was the genetic pinnacle of this null achievement. Even my instructional lead, a woman who could find a redeeming trait in a Balrog, failed to see any reason this kid or his family should be alive today. So here's a list of events that made it abundantly clear that God exists and he's laughing uncontrollably. Kevin frequently forgot when or where class was. On more than one occasion, I had to retrieve him from other classrooms. Kevin ate an entire 24-pack of crayons, puked, and then did it again the next day. This is ninth grade. I have no idea where he got the crayons. Kevin's dad wrote tuition checks and mailed them to me, his English teacher. This was a public school. When I gave it back to Kevin, voided to give to his dad with a brief note explaining that this is a public school, Kevin got in trouble for trying to spend it at 7-Eleven after school. Kevin was removed from the culinary arts program after leaving a cutting board on the gas stove and starting a fire. Twice. Kevin threw his lunch at the school resource officer and tried to run away. He ran into a door and insisted it wasn't him. Kevin stole my phone during class. I called it. It rang. He denied that it was ringing. Not that it wasn't his, not that he did it. No, he denied that the phone was actually ringing. He tried it 3 times before the end of the year. Kevin called the basketball coach a mother effing witch during gym. Basketball tryouts were that afternoon. Kevin tried out. It didn't go well. Kevin's mom could never remember which school he went to. She missed several meetings because she drove to other schools, none of which he ever went to. Kevin tased himself in the neck before a football game. Kevin kept a bottle of orange Kool-Aid in his backpack for about 4 months. He thought it would turn into alcohol. He drank it during homeroom and threw up. Kevin said the N-word a lot. Kevin was white. The high school was 84% black. Kevin got beat up a lot. Kevin stole another student's iPhone and tried to sell it back to them. Kevin didn't understand that his grade was dependent on tests, quizzes, homework, classwork, and participation. Kevin finished his first semester with a 3% average. He tried to bribe me with $11. Kevin spit on a girl and said, "You should get out of those wet clothes." The girl was the Spanish student teacher. Kevin didn't know dogs and cats were different animals. Kevin tried to download porn onto a computer in the library at the circulation desk while he was logged on. Kevin asked a girl to prom. He was in the ninth grade, and freshmen don't go to prom, by asking for her phone number and then texting her his address. Kevin got gum in his hair constantly. Kevin regularly tried to cheat on assignments by knocking the pile over, grabbing one before I picked them all up, and then writing his name on it wherever there was room. Kevin had several allergies, but neither his parents nor he could remember what they were. They were very concerned that the holiday party, it's high school, we don't have those, would have peanuts. When they finally got a doctor's note, he was allergic to amoxicillin. Kevin and his parents took a trip to Nassau. How the frack did they even get airline tickets? And forgot all their luggage at home. I didn't believe him when he told me until I talked to his mom, who told me first thing when I saw her at the biweekly meeting. Kevin's grandfather apparently died in a chainsaw accident. I can only assume God was looking the other way that day. Now, the first updates, and OP dove further into some of the more wild things Kevin did. Relevant comments. Commentator. I have to ask, was he popular with the girls? OP. Was like watching a greased up orangutan try to climb a water slide. OP. That was actually one of my favorites too because of how I found it out. We were doing an assignment on personification, and I had people describe their pets using it. Welcome to America, where we teach personification in high school. I know. Kevin didn't have any pets, but he said his neighbor had a cat he played with sometimes. He listed off like 3 or 4 things, and it became really apparent that he was describing a dog. At first, I thought that maybe he just had trouble figuring out the right way to say it. But after 2 or 3 more sentences, it was abundantly clear that this was a really big dog. Someone else who lived on the same street put 2 and 2 together as well and said, Kevin, that's not a cat. That's so and so's black lab. Kevin was absolutely floored that A, someone else lived on his street, and B, that there was a difference between a black lab and a house cat. Like, I'm only guessing, but I think to him, dog and cat were as interchangeable terms as hat and cap. You train and prepare as a teacher to try and find ways to redirect embarrassing situations, like a student being really wrong in public. But I was at a loss for how to move on from there. About Kevin tasing himself. OP. I wasn't at the game, but my instructional lead texted me that night with a picture of Kevin sitting on the tailgate of an ambulance surrounded by security and just the words, Isn't he one of yours? He was mostly fine, but it looked like he had been bitten by a vampire that wore socks on the carpet too much. No one knows where he got the taser or what happened to it. OP also shared, that was the hardest pill to swallow. Despite numerous tests and assessments and meetings and just overall study, no one could ever say he had any kind of learning disability. No IEP, no 504, no special file, no caseworker or advocate. Just Kevin, his mom, his dad, and zero brain matter. He was in a class with 2 other knuckleheads, but both of them were the too smart to do any work types, so they were more of a problem than Kevin. Both of them had 504s, and I had 11 or 12 kids with individualized education programs in there. So I had a collaborative to split the effort with. Fourth period with Kevin could go one of 2 ways. Either he'd do something so incredibly stupid within the first 10 minutes that he'd be gone most of class, or he'd just kind of simmer for the whole period and get everything wrong but not cause problems. So honestly, his behavior problems didn't get to me too much. Really, I waited for every other Monday so I could find out what new and stupid thing he or his family did. I'm pretty sure his mother was some kind of physical therapist. His dad? No idea. I only met him a few times, but he always wore a pretty nice suit or at least business casual. They both drove decently new cars, and his house was in a nice subdivision. I'm assuming that for what they lacked in common sense, they made up for in some kind of specialized knowledge. For all I know, his dad could have been a brilliant plastic surgeon, but an idiot in every other regard. They were both nice people. So, now, you might be wondering, whatever came of Kevin? Did he survive against the odds? Did he get lost in a paper bag and never find his way out? Well, OP posted an update many years later. Gee, Adidas, at around 2 years ago, I was in touch with Kevin's teacher, narrator of the story you/no other read, and here's a screenshot of their response. No Rickroll, I promise. How's our boy Kevin doing? So, I've got good news for you. Kevin is doing pretty well. We're actually coming up on about 10 years since I had Kevin as a student. I wrote about him several years after he was my student. He's since graduated on time, had a kid, gotten married, and has a house. He works as a sous chef at a fairly high end restaurant here in town, and if I recall correctly, he's taken some community college classes, which leads me to believe he might be looking at going out on his own career wise. I think that largely he just grew out of his immaturity and stupidity, as most kids eventually do. and perhaps having a kid in his teens also sobered him up a little bit. But yeah, it's a sort of happy ending to the story. If you've enjoyed the story and would like to hear more, consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Thanks, and bye for now.